Hello, welcome to Study History with Mr. P, and in today's video I'm going to focus on a case study of conscientious objectors in the First and Second World War. So conscientious objectors are people who are against war and fighting for different reasons that stem around their conscience not allowing it. So in 1916 the Military Service Act was passed, which introduced conscription in the UK for the first time. In March 1916, all unmarried men aged 18 to 41 were called up to join the armed forces. And this came to include men who were also married. And in 1918, the upper age limit was raised to 51. The backdrop against this, so this was the backdrop to men being required to fight during the First World War. Now, as I said, conscientious objectors or COs refused to fight because they said their conscience would not allow it. Many refused to fight because their religious beliefs did not allow it, and others refused to fight for political reasons. Absolutists refused to support the war in any way and were imprisoned, sometimes in solitary confinements. Some were even sent to the front line in France and were sentenced by a military court, sometimes to death, if they did not follow orders. Alternatives, though, would undertake other non-military roles, such as stretcher bearers, ambulance drivers, or auxiliary work. Their conscience wouldn't allow them to fight. So the Military Service Act contained a conscience clause that allowed for men to ask for exemptions on the ground of conscience. 16,500 men made this request and had to appear at a special court known as a tribunal. But tribunals did not always give fair hearings because they were held locally and so varied from area to area, and members were people who were often too old themselves to be called up, but still had views on the duty of others. Now, the real issue here for the First World War was how conscientious objectors were treated, and they were treated harshly because men were needed and it was seen as a duty. So they were portrayed as cowardly and unpatriotic. Some were even stopped in the street and given white feathers or sent hate mail as a sign of cowardice. Things changed a bit though during the Second World War. During the Second World War, the attitudes of both officials and to some extent the public was different. So in terms of officials, conscientious objectors were offered alternative occupations such as farm work, although those who actively campaigned against the war could still end up in court. But public opinion could still be hostile towards those who refused to fight, and some conscientious objectors were verbally abused, attacked, and even lost their jobs. So what we see is official attitudes changed to conscientious objectors between the First and Second World War, but in many respects public attitudes still stayed hostile to people who were not seen as being patriotic.